Hello and welcome to Creating Cittagazze, a behind-the-scenes look at His Dark Materials Season 2, presented by the BFI and Radio Times Television Festival. My name's Hugh Fullerton, the sci-fi and fantasy editor for RadioTimes.com, and today I'm joined by some of the creative giants who've helped make His Dark Materials come to screen. Specifically, I'll be talking to executive producer and production designer Joel Collins, VFX art director and Previs supervisor Dan May, senior VFX supervisor Russell Dodson from Framestore, casting director KAHLEEN Crawford, and composer Lorne Balfe about bringing the towering City of Magpies and His Dark Materials Season 2 in general to life. So I'm going to kick off by talking to the man who's been dreaming of Cittagazze streets since 2017, Joel Collins. So Joel, you've been working on His Dark Materials from the very inception with Jack Thorne, Jane Tranter and Dan McCulloch. I mean, how long have you been thinking of the sets for Season 2 and Cittagazze specifically?
Well, I think when we started, when I first met Jane and Dan and then Jack, I realised that it was quite a mammoth task to look at the books, because our intention wasn't just to make the first season, as it were, and see how it went, but it was to make the trilogy and do it justice and give it the time it needed. And so I tried to look at everything. The amber spyglass being really the kind of most interesting and weirdest place to get to in the trilogy. So I tried to look at all three books and work my way backwards. And obviously in that process, Cittagazze came up as a kind of key environment of Season 2 of the Subtle Knife. And so right from the onset, myself, Dan May, and the kind of creative concept team back in 2017 started thinking about everything in broad strokes. And Cittagazze came up as a place that was one to kind of start to work out. The truth of it was that during Season 1, when we were all together, Russell, Dan, myself, and the whole team, we started really like digging in. But I think there was a kind of flavour we put together three and a half years ago of what it could be, and it stayed quite close. And obviously we had the books and we had a lot of guides from all the writing and the amazing work that Jack did, and obviously what Philip did was our kind of guiding light. So we had lots of information and we had a basic idea back then. But yeah, it started coming together properly during the process of Season 1.
I mean, I think we actually have some of your original concept art, which will hopefully be playing on the screen. And you can really see, especially if you compare it to the finished article, what a clear kind of progression there was. I was actually lucky enough to get a tour from you, Joel, back in 2019 when the set was finished. And what really struck me was how immersive it was. The streets lead onto other streets. It's not just a main street and then on some blue screens. The shops, they go all the way through. I mean, was that important to you, to make it really immersive for the actors?
Well, it was a huge, knowing that knowing the weight of visual effects, and I think Russell would stand testament to the fact that the financial spread and the kind of creative spread of visual effects across the show is huge. And therefore, there's a kind of responsibility you have to choose how to put people in those worlds in a kind of as real a way you can, especially young people, and add an authenticity. So it was a real interesting balancing act. If we just did everything against blue screen in some ways, probably we'd break the VFX process completely, and what we'd end up with is something that is nowhere near as amazing as it is. And so trying to add physical authenticity to the show while giving the VFX team the ability, and Russell, who's guiding them all, the ability to do what he needed to do brilliantly was part of our bigger thinking here. And so yeah, I mean, we use VFX to calculate our issues, to work out how to build things. But I think adding reality was a big thing for me, giving people, the crew, and mainly the cast in a very experiential thing during shoot. So they actually felt the texture and felt the reality of the space was important.
I mean, it was a huge undertaking. It took, I think, 6 months to build. And I think to sort of see off the Welsh seagulls, you had to hire a hawk, you told me, to intimidate them. I mean,
they didn't kill any, by the way. There was no animals harmed.
It was an intimidation hawk.
It was just sat there and stared at them. Yeah, like obviously
just looking scary. But I was wondering, did you ever consider just going somewhere and filming a real town? I mean, it almost seems like this, obviously the finished result is so beautiful on screen, but, you know, was there ever a part of you thinking, God, we could just go somewhere that's already built?
Well, it was obvious. It was obviously a huge part of the conversation. You design things and you come up with ideas that are slightly fantasy, as it were, and then you need to kind of create a reality to it. So the first thing is we reviewed about 120 real towns across Europe, the world. I mean, I couldn't tell initially whether it could have been in Guilin in China, it could have been Italy, it could be anywhere within the kind of Mediterranean. There are many towns from Spain, Italy, and, you know, around the Mediterranean, and Morocco. So I think we decided just to look at everything and take, like magpies, take the best bits of everything. And we travelled Europe quite extensively to buy lots of elements to build the town too. But there's a kind of magic to the town, and I think you saw it, and it's a really fun thing to do. And it's just got the details of its own language, which other towns would never have. And obviously the other side of that is 6 months shooting incessantly in a town would never happen. Any tourist town, any town like this would end up being a town that tourists want to visit, and no town is going to let an old film shoot take it over for 6 months. It's just not, you know. So I think the reality was, it dawned on us while looking at the places we loved, that there was probably a chance to shoot there for a week, maybe two, maybe a month, but really owning it, it would never happen. We had to take a slightly different view on it and just, you know, create it.
And I think that also gave you some more creative freedom in terms of, you were showing me on set some of the, there's almost little Easter eggs for people to look out for. There's kind of hidden patterns and magpies and angel wings, and then the subtle knife itself and things like that. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of hub of all the worlds, and it's like a place of, you know, naughtiness from the guild, who basically have taken stuff from other worlds. And it's a place of connectivity. It's a connection. It's a place where windows have been opened into all these places. So I use that as a cue in design for, you know, everything in it, the building blocks of and the fabric of the building of the entire town, the metalwork, the flooring, the buildings themselves are made of bricks like angels and knives. So it's all there hidden. I mean, it's subtle and it's there for fun. And if people want to see it, and, you know, over time they might. But it kind of adds to its own, like, language in some way.
So obviously the scale of Cittagazze, the Cittagazze set is, you know, pretty unusual, but also pretty unusual is the method in which you guys kind of created it. Obviously, I'm going to turn to you, Dan, along with Joel here, because one of the things that His Dark Materials does, which a lot of people watching might not know, is that, I mean, the directors can walk through the streets and plan their shots before anything's built because of this unique VR system that you guys have kind of pioneered, right?
Well, I'd like to say we're part of the pioneering process. I wouldn't take the full credit for it, but in terms of the timeline of His Dark Materials from 2017 has been the sort of same timeline where the game engine technology and VR has sort of come into its own. And I was sort of looking at that and seeing what was happening in that world during kind of early pre-production, and I was quite excited by it. And on season 1, we developed it for a few things, mainly for Trollesund and the bear fight to some degree. We learned quite a lot, and then it became kind of a really good sort of design tool for the city itself. It's quite nice to design when you're dealing with those huge sort of world scales. What games do really well is that what's called open world sort of design, where you kind of create a massive space and you can kind of go in and find places. And I'm using that a lot now in our sort of concept sort of technique, sort of make an open world of an environment, and then you kind of find sets or find places that look interesting. And then if you're happy with them and the story is there, you know, once you've got scripts and things and you know that there's going to be certain story beats that take place in those, then you kind of pick them out and develop them up from the inside as sets and then extend out the other way around. A lot of times beforehand, you would start with a set in a small place and you would work in that, and then you would extend the world beyond. I'm sort of going at it now in a different, in the bigger world, and then going down and finding the small ones and then working my way out again. But yeah, we built sort of various versions of the city. I mean, as I said, as you sort of intimated at the beginning of the conversation, the initial concept was done way back in 2017, and we were kind of forced to come up with the main silhouette of the city quite early doors, because even though it was very smoke and mirrors in the photogram in Asriel's retiring room sequence, we knew we couldn't run away from it too much. And then we were also, at various parts of the last episode, when we see the city in the sky, we kind of knew we had to kind of commit to it to some degree. So a lot of the concept work of the principal layout had to be adhered to. And I think when Joel and I were planning the set design at the beginning about what we wanted to do, we were very keen to get a big playground, because also the scripts were still evolving at the point where we were building, and we had to build something that had some flexibility to it, because we weren't fully sure of all the sequences and scenes that would take place. So it was had to be quite a flexible space, and hence that's why it became the core thing was the tower and the square, which we could put at the top, which has kind of been established in the silhouette. And then we were able to have all these little spin-off areas that became streets and roads. And then originally, I mean, I was sort of, in some ways, trying to fight for some areas to be broken up so you could see out to the world. But ultimately, because of VFX spend, and we had loads of other things to sort of tackle and creatures to do, it was quite good that the city itself was quite enclosed, because it didn't encroach a big set extension number. But there were like 3 or 4 key areas of the set design that we eventually joined up geographically, which was the top, the square, the tower top base, the cafe, and the kind of area around the cafe and how that sit between the city. And then we had all this sort of Joel design, these kind of key staircases that were kind of like a signature of the city itself. And there were lots of shots of Lyra and various characters walking up and down them, and they became like little signature areas that connected up the spaces. And obviously there was some initial stuff about how Lyra and Will first entered the town and how we could kind of connect that. But when it came to like having that asset, there was a kind of constantly evolving, and you know, you start with a piece of concept art, and then you start with a planning model that can look a bit rough, and then you have a load of construction drawings and build that becomes really sophisticated and looks quite great, and then your concept model that was quite rough and obviously get to that stage suddenly looks quite rubbish. And at that point, we were also having to the point we wanted to turn it over to Framestore as something to get going on for like final shots. So we had to, in about a month, we had to kind of go back into the set, photograph, and then redesign and actually level up the design of the city. So we had a better virtual city, which was then used for post-viz, which maybe Russell could like talk a bit about, because we were keen for like the landscapes and things that it put in. We sort of pre-planned some of those shots with a vague idea of where we might go. And then we were able to drop in our model as a kind of like planning tool, which was really handy.
Yeah.
I can carry on talking about Cittagazze model and tech for like hours, but I thought you might want to ask me another question.
No, I mean, to be honest, I've seen some of these. Pre-viz and post-viz animations and things, and it's really crazy, like the way you can kind of travel through the city. And I mean, I guess part of my question, Joel, was, I mean, how closely did you and Dan work with, you know, the directors and Jack and everyone to kind of bring it all together and to create this world before it had even been physically created? I mean, it's an unusual process to kind of be able to play around with the sets before the sets are built.
We kind of used every tool in it. Once we realised we were going to be building this for real, we had to take a very serious kind of responsibility for using every tool in the toolkit to express it to everyone. You know, Russell had to be a part of understanding it and knowing that he was happy without doubt. Jack needed to make sure what he was writing was going to be within this space. And then kind of like the other side of that, which is the kind of the tools that we use, like the ones Dan's talking about, all the way through to like an actual little scale model for people to sit over. You know, that the virtual world is all very well if people engage, but they don't always engage. So we used everything we could to get people to fully engage, because we were dealing with, you know, if you say to somebody we're going to build a town, it's easy to say it. But if you think that every street needs flooring and, you know, bricks and mortar and windows and, you know, doors and interiors of houses and shops, and suddenly like building a town is like quite a severe and serious undertaking, both in sense of people commit, you know, people and time and money. So yeah, we used whatever we could to try and express it and include all of the key kind of creatives like Russell, like Dan, like Jane, like Jack, and all of and obviously as directors came, there was a kind of Dan took them on the virtual tour, as it were, of the town, but while we were building it. Sadly, sometimes in these things, when it takes upwards of a year to make something before you shoot it, you don't always have everyone available. So when they start, you might be halfway through. So, sometimes you very softly go, look, have a look at it virtually. And then they go, wow, that's interesting. And then you say, now come downstairs and have a look at it for free, for real. And they're like, oh, right. Yeah, we started, sorry, we had to build it already. But, so yeah, it was a big responsibility actually making the call to do something that scale for the show, and it involved everyone, including KAHLEEN. No,
Russell, you've been name dropped quite a lot already in this panel, and I haven't spoken to you yet. Obviously what you guys do at Framestore is such a huge part of the show. In series 1, I think things like the demons and the polar bears, were these absolutely huge elements. And I think, congratulations are in order from the BAFTA Craft Awards earlier in the year.
For Dan as well.
Yeah, for Dan as well. It's been well deserved. But I guess I have to ask, we've talked a little bit about your involvement in Cittagazze and all that, but I have to ask this year, there's all sorts of new things for you guys to tackle. There are maybe, slightly fewer demons this year because we're in different worlds, but there's, specters, angels, there's the knife effect. How did these things get communicated to the actors on set, and, what were they like to create?
I think the thing that's interesting is that when you think of dark materials as a kind of a visual effects challenge, the first thing you think about is how you make a whole bunch of demons. And actually what you realize when you're on the second season, actually, to be honest, halfway through the first, is that the demons kind of become the easiest thing. Do you know what I mean? Because there's a predictability about it. Once you work out what their characters are and you've got references for how they move and you make really nice assets for them, they become like the bread and butter and the pulse of the show in terms of the visual effects. And the things that really catch you out, they're always kind of one-off environments or any creature that is predominantly driven by effects, like our specters. So season 2, it offered some really different challenges from, if you think about the kind of the range of work, it kind of ranges from witches and some little witch battle-y things. Then you've got big wides and close-ups of the town that need to be in CG. But then on top of that, you've got the specters, which are all predominantly effects driven, but they actually also need to interact both with actors and with CG animals. So that's a whole puzzle to try and work out. And then you just throw in kind of the windows, which is another effects sort of driven element. And you've got a lot of really tricky things to work out. But the truth is, it's just about being as methodical. And I've got our producer says something which I always quote, which is you just break everything down into manageable portions of hell, which I think is a good way of looking at how you tackle big projects. So for the specters, what we did is a lot of the specters is you kind of read the book and you kind of try and understand the basic rules of them, which is, fundamentally it's that they're not really described as humanoid at all, and kids can't see them until they hit puberty. Right.
So that's already helping you out because half the time they're not there.
So rules help. Like that's the thing, and you can't do anything unless you define rules. And Joel is really big on that as well. So it's the same with the windows, it's the same with the angels, and it's trying to create a cohesive palette of rules that runs through what you do. And we try and do that from the if you look at the window effect, and then you look at the title sequence, they're connected. And when we use our angels, we start referencing how the windows work, because the windows are this kind of interdimensional quality that we're trying to represent. So we try and have a hint of that in the angels. And then when demons die, we have our dust. Our dust is also sort of referenced in other places. So you try and create rules, and you try and create rules for each individual thing and for the larger world. With the specters, the trickiest thing with them was just working out how they look and how you make something look different. Because we didn't want to do something humanoid. There's also the danger of just making dementors, which is something we wanted to avoid.
I was just thinking, it must have been very easy to go down that route, the kind of, scary hooded people.
It is tricky. And then also working out the different ways in which they move. And then when you do all that with effects inherently is unpredictable, because a lot of it is sort of algorithmic and procedural. So, you put in the values that you think, and you get this result, and you're like, that's really cool. And then you do the same thing on the different one from a different angle, and it's just utterly bananas and doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's a bit of a ride for the windows, because you asked about how we represented them on set. We always try and keep everything really, really simple, to be honest, because the rate at which we shoot, you know, in television, we try and keep things nice and simple, both for the directors, for the actors, because a big part of visual effects is just not being in the way. You know, it's making clear what you need up front, making sure you do a good job after, and trying to make yourself as helpful but, you know, unobtrusive when you're shooting. So actually all we did for that was we had a bit of fishing wire that we would attach to the ceiling and the ground. All it gave is all you really need for when someone, you know, maybe cuts a window, is they need something to look at, something to put a knife against that gives them some physical resistance with their hand, and something to run it down. That's all you need. And then, so if we use fishing wire, we can clean it up really easily. They can interact with it. They can see where it is. And then, yeah, so we always end up making like little custom rigs that just work for that particular scene. Try and keep it as sort of relaxed as possible. And that's it. I mean, it's kind of the same with the demons. We offer up puppets because they're lo-fi, but you get a lot from them. And you get character, and you get something back when you use it, in the same way that a wire gives you resistance, a demon gives you emotion, because you put your emotions onto it when you look at it. So yeah, we try and keep it kind of simple, I guess is the answer.
I think we actually have some footage of the VFX process for demons, so the viewers can see how it goes from puppetry to the fully realized demons we see on screen. And speaking of the demons, I've watched the first episode of the new series. It's great. And one of the things that immediately struck me was I felt like we see Pan change more often. He gets some new looks, which I think one of which we can show here, of him as a red panda, which ties in to the production design in a different way. There's so many layers to this, because there's a red panda pop, I think, which he's riffing off. Joel, am I right?
Yeah, there's a red berry in the town that the panda theoretically would eat, right. And the red berries turned into a pot, like a cola, and as it were, and is sold in the shops and the cafes. So it's branded. I think you know, layer of branding is always quite good. So Cittagazze's got its own, from the guild through to the magpie branding, through to the things like the red panda pop. You know. Yeah.
And so was there a conscious decision to maybe show a few more forms for Pan, because maybe there are a few other demons, so it's a little less confusing?
The funny thing is, I mean, there are sort of fewer demons, yet we still end up making new ones. So I guess there's still quite a lot of demons. I think what's interesting is that we always try and not be too on the nose with stuff, and just let things, like, you know, in the same way you said, when, you know, you walk around Joel's set, I always thought what was amazing about that set is that if you walk on it in Cardiff on a day when it's cold but the sun's out, it increases 10 degrees when you walk on, just because you feel like you're in the Mediterranean. And then when you walk out, it suddenly gets cold again. It's really weird. It's a bit like when you snow up an environment in summer and you suddenly start feeling cold, because your body just like absorbs what's around it. So so I think that idea of flavoring things is really important. So what we wanted to do is, with the red panda, the idea is that she's in a new world and she's experiencing new things, and she's someone that absorbs the world that's around her. And then she meets this boy who's kind of new, and her demon becomes something that's more exotic, really, than anything we've really seen before. But the red panda is kind of cool, and the reason why I really liked it is I remember it's actually like my suggestion to pick it, and it's because I went to a zoo and I was looking at it walk, and I was like, wow, they're really, really pretty, but they're actually a little bit clumsy. And I think there's something nice about that kind of teenage clumsiness, and sort of the fact that they kind of move a bit like a bear, whereas Pan's really smooth and fluid. The panda's just, it's a little bit lumbering and just a little bit more awkward sometimes. And I thought it just made like a really nice thing to fit into that world, when Lyra's having this new relationship with this new person, she's feeling all these new things, and then you've got this demon that sort of very subtly represents that without doing anything too heavy.
I think it works really well.
Yeah, I think so too. Also, I've never seen anyone make a CG red panda, so it's a win.
First.
Yeah.
Definitely not. Yes.
What do you think?
No capes, Lyra.
No capes.
Oh, what does he know? Or hats. The point is to blend in. This is good enough for you, Pan.
You can't put pan at that.
Lyra, people are going to be looking for me. Bad people, the police. You mustn't look different or you'll draw attention to us. They'll start asking questions. They'll find this window and everything. This is a good hiding place. I'm safer here. So let's keep it that way. Lyra?
So obviously, a lot of TV shows this year have been affected by the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown and various restrictions. His Dark Materials Series 2 has been relatively lucky in terms of most of the footage was shot before that. But obviously, Russell, your team and the VFX artists in general probably were very affected because all the post-production work you normally be doing together in one location is all spread out and, you know, maybe not on the equipment you'd be used to. I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting, like COVID's been like really interesting because it holds a mirror up to how you do everything, and it improves. It shows you the things that are bad, it shows you the things that are good, and you improve things, and it's awesome in that way. Actually, I mean, the visual effects team and Framestore, they've done honestly, they've done an amazing job. They went from I think they put our entire team onto working from home within a week. And we dropped productivity from like 100% down to about 80% and back up to about 98%, I reckon. I mean, you can never hit 100% of what it used to be. It becomes a new thing. And, you know, and that's got nothing to do with me. It's actually got nothing to do with the artists. I mean, they do a great job of balancing their home lives. You know, you've got artists who are trying to deliver shots and do reviews with me whilst their daughters are sleeping in the same room. You know, it's not easy at all. But the really amazing thing is the engineers that we have who manage to somehow support, you know, 500-600 people. In fact, when the whole company went remote, it's over 1,000 people, 1,500 people, something like that. And everybody's got a different internet connection. So you've got some guy who lives in sort of Somerset who gets 3 megasecond and he's still trying to do really complicated animation.
Right.
So that's the stuff that's hard. But really what's hard is how you all communicate. And I think the thing that's really been amazing is the chat is, you know, like COVID, I just saw COVID as some massive challenge. You know, it's just another thing to try and work out. And I think what was interesting is, you know, we lost an episode due to COVID. And that episode, luckily, was predominantly standalone, but it still had things that we wanted to tell in the overall story. So what we had to do is we went from kind of very comfortably having a plan to suddenly saying, right, we've got to re-break our 7 episodes and make sure that we've got all of the right components and the core bits that we want to tell from this extra episode in there. So we ended up having to create whole new sequences that tell more backstory. And, you know, the editorial team, Joel, Dan, everybody just hustled and worked from their remote locations to move all these pieces and get them all together in a really, really sort of difficult situation. And I think that's the thing that's great, right? It's like you said, COVID holds a mirror up and it makes you realize how good you can be as a team as well sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's good.
Obviously, we've talked a lot about the demons there and how they're brought to screen visually. But KAHLEEN, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about casting for demons. I mean, that must be crazy because you're casting quite late in the day and, you know, the kind of creatures are already realized. But also, how do you know what a bird of prey sounds like as a human voice? I mean, what's that like?
Some of the auditions are quite fun to listen to because it's people's own interpretation of what a bird of prey sounds like. I think the demons were a massive challenge for us because Dan Jackson's the other casting director of the show. Neither of us had ever done any voice casting before. So, and it's an art. So we had to learn that art relatively quickly. And I think there was a bit of trial and error through the process. Obviously we started that in series 1. So there was a bit of trial and error. There's also the fact that the demons, essentially, they have a form that is the form that's, you know, created and imagined by these amazing people. And they have, they relate to a person who's played by a human actor. And they're the, you know, if that actor is male, then the demon is female. So they're the opposite. And then you're also thinking about the actor's voice and accent and what the background of that character is to put into the demon's voice. So you've got multiple sort of things going on. And I think sometimes ultimately what was true was we knew it when we heard it, but we just had to keep going until we heard it.
I mean, watching the new series, I was just struck by a moment because we meet Ruta Skadi, played by Jada Nuka, who's a new character, and her demons. I'm not sure what kind of bird it is. I don't know if anyone can help me. Some sort of kestrel.
Red kite.
Red kite, thank
Which
you.
I believe is the national bird of Wales as well.
There you go, very appropriate.
Yes.
And I was immediately, gosh, I know that voice. I know that voice. Who is that? It's just such a strong voice, so familiar. And I went and looked it up, and it's Shope Derizu, who some people might know from Gangs of London, and he's been in Humans and Black Mirror and stuff as well. And you know, you do get some quite big names for these birds for quite small roles. Like David Suchet is Kaiser, and Helen McCrory in season 1 was Stella Maria. I mean, it's great that you get such big names. I mean, how do you kind of get them involved for doing what is relatively kind of like very small voice parts?
I think in some ways we're quite lucky, because I think the show, especially now that we've got series 1 in the bag and it's been broadcast and actors are familiar with it and their families are falling in love with it, and it's captured the imagination of a lot of people. I think that made series 2 voice casting a little bit easier. A, we had learned a lot more, and B, the actors knew what we were talking about. And we have, as you see, we've got some fantastically talented actors who are also extremely well known to play relatively small parts. And I have to say, without a great deal of argument, I think 1 or 2 of the actors' agents were thinking, we'd lost our minds, you want who to do 3 lines? And then they would phone up and say, oh, so they absolutely said yes without me even really saying much other than, it says Dark Materials, do you want to be the voice of someone's demon, you know? And so we had fun with it a bit, you know, with Andrew Scott. John Parry's demon is played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So
it's the big Fleabag reunion that we've all been waiting for.
Right, so they have that connection, and I think that worked. I think that worked really well, but also her voice, we just felt fitted to form in a way that we imagined that would sound like. So so we were really lucky. And with Shope, you know, he's just absolutely brilliant. And to be honest, Dan McCulloch, our exec producer, who we worked very closely with on the casting, was completely in love with him in Gangs of London. And when we were talking about that character, we had a lovely list, and he sort of said, "Do you think he would be up for it?" And of course, sure enough, he was. So I think we've been really lucky with both series, and some of our voice actors were on set as well and working with the actors, and you know, during the kind of creation of the voice, like Joe Tanberg, who plays one of our polar bears.
I mean, it's really great performances from so many people. Obviously, we shouldn't forget, though, you also cast live action actors who we see on screen. And one of the things I was curious about was, you know, we've talked about creating different worlds and the feel of different worlds. But I mean, what's it like to cast for kind of 3 worlds at the same time?
I think it's something that you always have to keep in mind. I think the bigger picture is always a huge part of a casting process, and it can make it a little bit tricky. You know, it's not always ideal because, you know, different scripts come at different times and you haven't got to that character yet, and maybe someone who you thought would be bigger turns out to be smaller, so you can't perhaps go for the person that you were hoping to. All sorts of different things. So you're always constantly trying to keep this global picture, but never more so than when there are sort of differences and tonal differences in these worlds. I mean, I think particularly if you look at, you know, with Cittagazze, you've got these children who are running the show. And so you've got a really, you know, the characters are very strong flavours themselves. They've also got to match up to our leads who are carrying a lot of the show, and they're playing all the scenes opposite. And then you've also got the heightened world with the witches, which is a really interesting to get right in the performances, and was very challenging for the casting. When we started that whole process, was just because their language is different, their dialogue is different. We had to get that right. But again, you know, you have to kind of keep that global picture and try and make sure that all different parts of the story and different worlds within our overall story and His Dark Materials and in the trilogy as a whole just have some sort of tonal balance. So yeah, it's something you're just constantly keeping in mind and hoping that you're getting right.
You mentioned some of the children of Cittagazze there. I think I'm right in saying that Paula, is a new character who's a gender swap of a character in the books called Paolo, played by Ella Shrey Yates. And we should have a picture of her alongside Game of Thrones star Bella Ramsey. We should have a picture of her alongside Game of Thrones star Bella Ramsey. And I mean, what made you decide to make that change? It's quite an interesting one.
It was the casting process. It honestly was the casting process. We had phenomenal kids coming in and young adults coming in to see us for these roles. Some of them had come through from the earlier search for Lyra. In fact, we'd been able to bring some of the kids back in. You know, they invest with us early in the casting process, and it's good if you can just keep them in mind for things that might come up later down the line. And see if you can then find an opportunity to cast them. And certainly with series 1, we were able to do that with Bolvanger. We had a lot of the kids we were able to bring back in for that episode. So for here, we knew some of the kids, but we just had an embarrassment of riches in the casting process. And when it came down to it, we had some really brilliant younger brothers to play Paolo. But ultimately, we had these 2 girls, Ella and Bella. That did cause a bit of confusion. Ella and Bella, who were so strong in their performances that, if I'm remembering correctly, it was essentially decided that their parts should be made bigger and there would be more for them to do on screen. And they were such a great double act as well. So yeah, that's what happened there. Sorry, Paolo's.
Sorry, Paolo's. I mean, it works brilliantly on screen. And like you say, the difficulty of casting for different worlds, you know, you've got to be thinking about it all the time. And I guess my next sort of slightly awkward segue would be, you know, Carleen's casting for different worlds. But Lorne, I mean, you're scoring for different worlds. You're creating the kind of music, the mood of these places. I mean, did you approach it differently, Lyra's world, our world, and Cittagazze?
That's not at all awkward. That's a really good segue there.
Thank you. I'll have to practice them more.
No, you know, the thing is that I think right from the beginning, we had looked at the different worlds, and but firstly, I can't do my job without concept art. That's how I really kind of begin, because I'm working on episodes where they're not finished sometimes. So I kind of, in my studio, I just, I have pictures and printed out drawings of the different worlds, and the whole opening titles I had all over the studio. And that's where I get the kind of the inspiration from, and trying to kind of, you know, there's 2 tasks. It's trying to write melodies, and then it's also trying to find what the DNA is, the colors that you add to these melodies. So I think from day one, we always knew that we wanted all the characters to have their own themes, but also it was important to try to kind of have their own instrumentation, and their own musical DNA that kind of is unique to it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because, you know, we kind of looked at some of the worlds and thought, well, maybe it should be more electronic, especially with Will's world. And I think that, I think mainly with this season, Will was the hardest one to write for, I thought, musically, just because of last season, the fact that what the world he was in was kind of more electronic. And so now, you know, I kind of delved into working more on his theme and making it different. But I think I've got the least hardest of everybody's jobs on this call, really, because I get it's all the hard work is done for me. It looks great. There's a backstory for it. It's like the Cittagazze, you know, to me, that theme I wrote, I had it 7 times, brand new concepts, and it wasn't. I wasn't getting thumbs up, and then again went back to the concept art, and yeah, trying, you know, the instrumentation in it is Middle Eastern. There's also, it's very Celtic. There's Uilleann pipes in it. So it's not one style. There's also there's Chinese instruments in it. You know, it's to try to not make it so when you listen to it, you go, oh, it's from this country. It doesn't exist. So it's to try to make a blend of all of these different cultures.
I mean, it's definitely beautiful music. I mean, I've seen the first 2 episodes, and it's really nice and wonderful to listen to. And I mean, I think we actually have a clip of some of the orchestration for season 2, which we can hopefully play. And yeah, I'm also being told that sometimes what the choir sings is translated from Latin in the books. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, true. The whole, even season 1, you know, our opening titles this season, it's different. You get it more complicated. It's a Bulgarian female choir singing Latin.
Right.
But we've changed the lyrics to make it more appropriate to this season. But you know, the interesting thing is that COVID hit us badly with the kind of the whole process, because last year we were able to record in Cardiff. We had the BBC Symphony Orchestra. It was fantastic. And then lockdown happened, and I'm used to writing in my spare bedroom. It's just normal life. But musicians, the concept of going into a studio went, and it's still semi-gone. We can only get a tenth of what we used to have. So that greatly changed the way of working. And that clip we watched was in Vienna, who they were more ahead of us COVID-wise, with the precautions. So we were able to kind of record there more. But yes, that COVID changed a lot for that kind of recording process. And also, we lost some musicians who kind of actually ended up not leaving the profession, ironically.
Wow.
You know, the payoff was so quick in the arts that a lot of musicians ended up kind of deciding after those 2 months of lockdown that I'm going to get a normal job. So we kind of we lost a lot of that kind of musical talent that we had relied on from season 1.
I mean, that is such a tragedy. I mean, you've seen so many examples of similar things in different arts industries, I think. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think it's just a testament to all of you guys' professionalism and drive that you managed to get season 2 finished and, you know, managed to get it out there. And I think we're all really excited to see how it turns out. I actually just have one final question for all of you, because I think we've been talking for a while now. And I guess the question would be, what made season 2 different for each of you, and was it a bigger challenge?
I think that outside of COVID, I think what's tricky is that the second book is so different from the first. It's so unbelievably different that if you watch the 2 in isolation, or 2, you might not know that they're totally connected, just because, you know, you go from this first book is like every single episode is a different world, a different place. You meet polar bears. The second book is actually a much sort of more sort of gentle story in some ways. So I think that one of the tricky things for me was trying to continually find the thread between them and make sure we're always honoring the kind of the overarching kind of story that goes across all three books. But also the differences, including, you know, taking away bears, adding spectres, taking away, you know, the north, adding Cittagazze, all of those things, they're really nice challenges. So, you know, I think the hard bits have been the fun bits as well.
So I'd say that the exciting thing is to make a show for a growing audience and to tell a story that matures as the kind of leads mature, the audience mature potentially, in the sense of a young audience that grows with the show and fan bases around that can grow with it. And on top of that, and the real privilege and pleasure for a few of us, or a lot of us on Dark Materials and at Bad Wolf, was the idea of almost 6,000 young people visiting the studio, seeing the sets, being inspired to go into the industry in Wales. And that was kind of a high point of season 2 for me, was knowing that we'd had this huge weight of young people also being inspired to enter into this business.
How about you, Dan?
Mine's a lot shorter. Mine's the challenge of season 2 is that we were still doing season 1, so that was complex. But yeah, there were some cool new challenges in it. I mean, yeah, to reflect what Joel said, I think painting practice at one time felt more like a sort of inside of an aquarium with like various people just sort of coming past and sort of going, oh, what's going on today? And that was kind of fun. So you're doing all this, and obviously developing the new tech that we'd done on season 1, sort of playing around and actually learning and understanding what that was used for and why, and then being able to show that to all these young people that were coming in and that being fun. And also just the magic and the scale of it, I suppose. So, you know, we did a lot of those tours where we would show people a sort of slightly crap computer game version of Cittagazze, and then they get to go out into the backlot and see this amazing set. And nearly everyone was like totally awe-inspired by that, the scale of it. That wasn't that short, sorry, I started riffing.
It wasn't that short.
I know, I just started riffing, I can't help it.
I mean, Lorne, what about you? It sounds like the COVID restrictions were one of the biggest things, but were there other challenges?
Oh yeah, listen, every day is a challenge for me. Getting out of bed is hard enough, but no, it's, you know, it was much harder for me than season 1 because of this not having so many worlds. Like, you couldn't change color so often musically, so you had to kind of work harder at it. But you know, it's also hard with Lyra and Will. You know, they're maturing and it's difficult kind of looking at when we wrote that piece of music at the first episode of season 1, when she's running around the city, the town. It's like she's a different person now, and but we've still got to keep that same theme. So it's all this. I would say it was really the character development. So was different, and it was trying to make their themes grow with them. And then the second point is that damn COVID ruining it.
And finally, what about you, Colleen? What was the biggest challenge for you?
I think I don't know if I could say there was a biggest challenge in series 2. That I think it's like childbirth. I've forgotten the pain. No, I think for one of the things that was different was that some aspects of it were easier. We had got our head round voice casting. We had established a lot of tones, and we were working to complement those tones a bit more. And I think we had a smaller cast in series 2, you know, than we did in series 1, so that made it a little bit easier. But I think, am I allowed to talk about the potential of a series 3? I've absolutely no idea what Amalekith is going to sound like. Absolutely no idea, yeah.
I mean, obviously, I am going to let you all go in a moment, but my next question was actually for Joel specifically. I mean, what have you and the other execs been talking about for the future? Season 2 is coming out. We're all very excited, but we're also all looking into the spyglass, as it were. wondering if there's a season 3 and what we could expect.
If we'd planned this right, I would have just said, "Oh, I could tell you what the Malefa sounds like. It sounds," and then you just cut me.
Cut the cameras.
That'd be it. I can, and then it's just like end of broadcast. No, there's a lot of exciting things coming, and it's going to be more complicated for everyone on this panel in every way, I think, and that's what's really exciting about it. Because I think we're all here because we like those challenges. None of us are here because we think this is an easy job or that we've nailed it and we can sit back and watch it happen. It's like fighting to the end, and it's fighting for a good cause, which is to make these amazing books get on screen. And that third book, the Amber Spyglass, is really interesting, and I think will challenge us all to our core, and it's coming. And from what I can see, is shaping up to be really exciting.
I mean, I can't wait. I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. Not even watched season 2, but already I'm too excited. Listen, I've got to thank you all for taking the time to do this. So thanks to Russell, Joel, Dan, Kahleen, and Lorne. The BFI and Radio Times generally would like to thank everyone who made this panel happen, especially the panelists, everyone at the BBC, Bad Wolf, IGPR Cymru, and obviously you, the viewers who have tuned in to watch it. And you can see all these lovely people's work come to life on BBC One from November the 8th, Sunday, November the 8th on BBC One, which can be very exciting. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.